Ευχαριστώ πολύ. So, let's get started. Hello to everyone. Good afternoon to everyone joining us from Sikago. Good evening to everyone joining us from Greece. We are very excited to welcome you to our event, The Greek Language, Present, Past, and Challenges in Teaching. We are very excited to have people from all over the world in order to celebrate the Greek language. And of course, we are very happy that we're able to all come together virtually in the International Day of the Greek Language. So we will get started with the greetings. For our first greeting, we have Apostolos Dimitropoulos, which is the Secretary General for Higher Education at the Hellenic Ministry of Education and Religious Affairs. He was not able to join us live since because of the time difference in Greece, but he was kind enough to send us a recorded message, so we will be playing that.
Dear Vice Rector of Academic Affairs and Student Welfare at the Democritius University of Thrace, dear Ambassador of Greece in the USA, dear Consul General of Greece in Chicago, dear Director of the Center for Hellenic Studies at the University of Chicago, dear professors, ladies and gentlemen. On the occasion of the celebration of the International Greek Language Day, which is also the official commemoration day of the Greek national poet Dionysios Solomos, I would like to thank you warmly for the kind invitation to address today's conference. I would also like to take this opportunity to congratulate the Democritius University of Thrace on its multifaceted work, its firm commitment to the research of the Greek language, as well as on its remarkable initiatives towards extroversion and internationalization. We are all aware of the fundamental role the Greek language has played in the shaping of Western civilization throughout the centuries. In our modern times, however, the integration of Greece in the European family may lead to a side reflection. What is the future of a small language in a European and globalized reality? I strongly believe that its vitality and its historical heritage will allow it to exist and flourish. On our part, we need to modernize our methodology and struggle to this end in a systematic way with strategic planning, a long-term perspective, and the use of new technologies. The Ministry of Education, in addition to the support it offers to Greek language teaching abroad, and the initiatives it has promoted for developing language teaching as a mother tongue, as a second language, or as a foreign language, it has clearly demonstrated that extroversion and internationalization of our education system, and particularly the universities, is a strategic priority. Within this policy framework, the government is strongly committed to fostering internationalization initiatives by promoting the creative exchange of ideas, the diffusion of knowledge, and intercultural communication. Our main goal is to facilitate Greek universities to engage with foreign ones in order to launch synergies that may involve the creation of joint and dual undergraduate and postgraduate programs, participation in summer schools, exchanges of students, academics, and researchers, as well as any other joint initiatives the universities themselves will choose to activate. Greece is ready to become a host country for students and academics from all over the world. Our vision is to turn Greece into an international education hub in Southeastern Europe. We are also convinced that among other important benefits for our country and its citizens, this vision will give more impetus to Greek language learning among Greeks and non-Greeks. Supporting our universities to expand their international cooperation activities, we open up new avenues for Greek language too. The Greek diaspora, the large and diverse communities of Greeks abroad, should be a fundamental asset of our strategy. It is now more imperative than ever to utilize the Greek diaspora networks with their enormous potential of distinguished academics and scientists so that they can function as intellectual ambassadors of Greece and the Greek language abroad. Allow me to finish my short address with some verses of a poem by Nikiforos Vertakos entitled The Greek Language. If ever by chance I meet angels, Among the light blue corridors, I shall speak to them in Greek. Since they do not speak languages, they speak to each other with music. Thank you very much for your attention.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And next up, we are very excited to have the Ambassador of Greece to the United States of America, Alexandra Papadopoulou. Madam Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for including me in this interesting discussion on an issue of importance to all of us, and especially to our communities in the Greek diaspora, which is the Greek language. Σας ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ όλους που είστε παρόντες σε αυτό το εργαστήριο και ειλικρινά θα ήθελα να στείλω ιδιαίτερες ευχαριστίες στους ομογενείς μας από την Ουκρανία. Ξέρουμε πάρα πολύ καλά πόσο δύσκολες μέρες περνάνε, οι σκέψεις όλων μας είναι μαζί τους. Congratulations to the University of Chicago Center for Hellenic Studies, the Democritius University of Thrace, and of course the Greek Consul General in Chicago for their vision and foresight in recognizing the need for such initiatives in the effort to find new and innovative ways to teach Greek as a second or foreign language. Such undertakings are just as interesting and important to Greece as they are to those of Greek heritage around the world. Especially with Greece being the recipient destination of so many people and the gateway between so many cultures and regions of the world at this converging point of three continents. This seminar brings together from both sides of the Atlantic an impressive slate of scholars, academics, secondary education students, and teachers. I'm especially pleased that it is engaging students, making them part of the process rather than the passive recipients of final outcomes. Today, we also celebrate the Greek language. International Greek Language Day, a day of tribute to the language of Homer and the New Testament, was instituted about 5 years ago. The date was chosen to coincide with the official commemoration day of Dionysios Solomos, Greece's national poet, the author of the hymn to freedom, the first two stanzas of which became Greece's national anthem. Though it was established relatively recently, this concept has already taken root and bearing fruit. It is celebrated around the world, affording communities, organizations, and individuals the opportunity to reflect on long history and beauty of the Greek language. It is sparking celebratory activities and discussions, as well as stimulating study and research, all leading to a better understanding of the language, its history, and ultimately of Greek culture in the world. Greek is a living language. It lives and breathes and evolves with history and the times. Its rich vocabulary has evolved over thousands of years and through a number of sources and chapters of history. It is a language that ebbs and flows with history. The oldest of the two Indo-European languages and dating back thousands of years, the Greek language generally gives to other languages. It is estimated that as much as 90% of scientific terms are derived from Greek, but it also has and continues to absorb from and incorporate words and concepts from other languages. That is the characteristic of a living language, a language that has the ability to adapt, to evolve, and enrich itself with new words or concepts and ideas that are born out of the evolution of our civilization. It is malleable, transformative language that can lend as well as borrow without losing itself and identity in the process. I'm very pleased to be part of this productive discussion among such a diverse group of scholars and students, and I hope that this is only the beginning of a long tradition of such gatherings and deliberations. Καλή επιτυχία σε όλους. Ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Thank you so much for this wonderful speech. And next up, we have Professor Anastasia Giannakidou, who is a professor of linguistics and, of course, the director of the Center for Hellenic Studies at the University of Chicago. Anastasia, the floor.
Ευχαριστώ, Χριστίνα. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. Την καλησπέρα μου σε όλους. I am extremely pleased also to welcome Ambassador Alexandra Papadopoulou and thank her also for her wonderful greeting and speech. She said everything I wanted to say, but let me add a little bit more about how significant the Greek language is. Today in the world, Greek is a small language. It's only spoken by perhaps a total of 16, 17 million people. But we linguists have categorized Greek as one of the world's most important languages. And the reason we have done that is because of the literature and because of the ideas that have been expressed in the Greek language and the influence those ideas have had not only on Western civilization, but in shaping modern global civilization in general. So Greek has a special place for us Greeks because it is the language, it is the feature that identifies us as Greeks through the ages. Ambassador Papadopoulou talked about this. It is the distinctive property that made everybody that spoke this language be able to share ideas and live in a cultural experience that was defined by that culture. So Greek has an unbroken tradition. So there are other ancient languages being spoken out there, Chinese or Hebrew, but Greek has an unbroken tradition of speaking and writing. There is currently, since basically the 17th century BC, we have written documents in the Greek language, and there was never a point in time where Greek stopped being spoken. So it is the one constant feature of our culture, and it is the one that defines us, as I said earlier, through the ages. Now, it is very important to emphasize the significance of Greek, especially in the diaspora, because in the diaspora we have problems with preserving this continuity. And thanks to the efforts of many enlightened colleagues and dignitaries, most prominently also our new Consul General, Mr. Manos Koubarakis, who also partook in this effort to organize this event. We're very pleased to be able to invigorate efforts for the teaching of the Greek language and help educators as well as scholars and researchers dive into it and work with students of all ages towards a better learning of the language and a better reflection upon what it means to learn it and speak it. So the Center for Hellenic Studies here at the University of Chicago is very committed to any support that has as its goal the education in the Greek language. And as I said, we're very happy to work with dignitaries here, also with the metropolis in Chicago. I'm very pleased to also acknowledge Mrs. Maria Hadzinakos, who is here and who is also very pivotal in our efforts to reach out to the teachers and the school communities and be able to serve as a forum that gives knowledge and expertise and pushes the teaching of the Greek language forward. Lastly, let me also acknowledge the collaboration that we have with the University of Thrace, the Δημοκριτείου University of Thrace, specifically the SυνMόρΦωση laboratory that they have at the Department of Linguistics. We're very pleased for this collaboration. They have been very generous at giving us all their expertise and knowledge. And this is the first, and we look forward to many more events in the future. Thank you all for being here. Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ που είστε όλοι εδώ σήμερα.
Thank you, Professor Giannakidou. And now for our final greeting, we have Professor Zoe Gavrilidou, who is the Vice Rector of Academic Affairs and Student Welfare at the Δημοκριτείου University of Thrace.
Thank you very much, Christina. Your Excellency, Ambassador of Greece to America, Mrs. Alexandra Papadopoulou, Honorable Consul General of Greece in Chicago, Mr. Koubarakis, dear Director of the Center for Hellenic Studies at the University of Chicago, Anastasia Giannakidou, dear colleagues, dear teachers, ladies and gentlemen, I am particularly pleased for participating in this conference dedicated to the Greek language on the occasion of the International Greek Language Day. The Greek language, with its long history, has preserved and assimilated everything useful that the pre-Hellenic Mediterranean civilization had to offer. It also has put concepts in order, leading men from myth to reason, has endowed scientific terminology with terms, has offered new elements for the creation of new terms, and has captured the essence of Western civilization. Today's event includes two speeches, one on the diachrony and one on the synchrony of Greek, but mainly give teachers the opportunity to make their voices heard by offering two hands-on workshops that aim to help develop methods for teaching Greek as a heritage language, and a session that gives the floor to teachers themselves and to what they have to say as they share their teaching experiences with us. This day, our thoughts are with Greek diaspora teachers who struggle to keep Greek language alive. This event is dedicated to them. This event also marks the beginning of a close collaboration between the Δημοκριτείου University of Thrace, the Consulate General of Greece in Chicago, and the Center for Hellenic Studies of the University of Chicago for the promotion of Greek language and culture. I must admit that the original idea for the organization of the conference came from the Consul General of Greece in Chicago, Emmanuel Kouparakis. I thank him warmly for trusting us with it and inviting us to join in. I would also like to thank the Consul and the President of the Center of Hellenic Studies for the excellent cooperation we had so far. Finally, I would like to thank Yuli Zika for her full support in the organization of the event, Thodoris Koukos, who handles the Zoom meeting, he's behind the screen, Christina Filippaki and Mary Hadzinakos, the presenters of the event, Stefanos Katsikas for his help, our facilitators, Lydia Mitic and Maria Mitsiaki for the two workshops, and of course all the members of the organizing committee, including Penelope Kambaki Mouyoukli, I think she is with us. She was the ex-dean of our School of Classics and Humanities. Finally, I would like to thank all of you participating in this event. And of course, I wouldn't like to forget Dionysis Vouchos, our speaker, who will give us his talk in a few minutes. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So we can now move into the first presentation of the event. This will be given by Professor Zoe Gavrilidou. Professor Gavrilidou is a professor of linguistics and a vice record of academic affairs and student welfare and head of the quality assurance unit of Δημοκριτείου University of Thrace. She is also president of the European Association of Lexicography and author of more than 100 publications, including books, papers in journals, and Congress proceedings. She is author of school textbook for teaching Greek and curricula for language teaching. Recently, she compiled together with her colleague Maria Mitsiaki the curricula for teaching Greek as a heritage language for the Archdiocese Schools of America. Professor Gavrilidou will be presenting her lecture titled The Journey of the Greek Language in Time Through Words, and the presentation will be taking place in Greek. Professor Gavrilidou, the floor is yours.
Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ, Χριστίνα, μία ακόμα φορά, να σας καλησπερίσω μία ακόμα φορά. Πράγματι, αυτό που θα προσπαθήσω να δω σε αυτή την ομιλία είναι το ταξίδι της ελληνικής μέσα στο χρόνο, μέσα κυρίως από το λεξιλόγιο. Θα ξεκινήσω λοιπόν από πολύ παλιά. Δεν ξέρω, πείτε μου αν βλέπετε την δεύτερη διαφάνεια τώρα. Εντάξει. Δώστε μου λίγο feedback.
Ναι,
ωραία, πολύ ωραία, ευχαριστώ. Ξεκινούμε λοιπόν από πολύ παλιά. Εν αρχή λοιπόν ήταν οι προέλληνες, ένας θαλάσσιος πολιτισμός που μας έχει δώσει πολλές λέξεις που έχουμε πολύ δημιουργικά ενσωματώσει μέσα στο λεξιλόγιο της ελληνικής. Λέξεις βέβαια που αφορούσαν ονόματα ψαριών, διότι όταν ήρθαν οι Έλληνες, τα ελληνικά φύλλα ήρθαν από το βορρά και δεν είχαν όλα αυτά τα ονόματα, λέξεις όπως Αθερίνη, Σκόμβρος που είναι το γνωστό σκουμπρί, επίσης φυτά μεσογειακής βλάστησης όπως η Δάφνη, ο Ρίγανος και πολλά άλλα τέτοια ονόματα. Ήταν ένας πολύ υψηλός πολιτισμός και αυτό το μαρτυρούν λέξεις που επίσης κληροδοτήσεις μας έχουν κληροδοτήσει όπως μέγαρο, άρα είχαν λίθινη δόμηση, ενώ όταν ήρθαν οι Ινδοευρωπαίοι, δηλαδή τα ελληνικά φύλλα, είχαν ξύλινη δόμηση, επομένως είχαν έναν πολιτισμό πολύ λαμπρό, λέξεις όπως σωλήν, ειρήνη, βασιλεύ, που δηλώνουν ότι είχαν μια πολύ ψηλή κοινωνική οργάνωση. Θυμάστε ότι η λέξη η ελληνική για το βασιλεύ ήταν άναξ, βάναξ. Τώρα, στη συνέχεια κατέβηκαν τα ενδοευρωπαϊκά φύλλα, το ελληνικό φύλλο ήρθε και εγκαταστάθηκε στην ελληνική Χερσόνησο και αυτή η πρώτο ελληνική που έφερε μαζί του ήταν μια γλώσσα που ήταν πολύ κοντά στην ενδοευρωπαϊκή. Θυμίζω ότι τα ελληνικά φύλλα ήρθαν σε διαδοχικά κύματα και ήρθαν και επικάθισαν πάνω σε διαφορετικά επιστρώματα, δέχτηκαν επίσης και διαφορετικές εξωτερικές επιδράσεις και αυτό οδήγησε σταδιακά σε μια πάρα πολύ ισχυρή διαλεκτική διαφοροποίηση. Έτσι λοιπόν, οι μαρτυρίες λένε ότι και η επιστημονική έρευνα έχει δείξει ότι ποτέ σε τόσο μικρό χώρο όπως είναι η ελληνική Χερσόνησος δεν βρέθηκαν τόσες πολλές διάλεκτοι. Οι διάλεκτοι, οι αρχαίες ελληνικές, οι κυριότερες που γνωρίζουμε, σύμφωνα και με την κατάταξη που υπάρχει, ήταν η Αρκαδοκυπριακή, η Αιωλική, η Άττικο-Ιωνική και η Δυτική. Και για να καταλάβετε την πολυμορφία που υπήρχε και το πώς ήταν, ας πούμε, μια Βαβυλωνία, δεν ξέρω αν γνωρίζετε το έργο Βαβυλωνία, θα μιλήσω στη συνέχεια γι' αυτό. Υπήρχε μεγάλη διαφορά σε απλές λέξεις. Για να δούμε ένα παράδειγμα, οι Ιωνές λέγαν τέσσαρες, οι Αθηναίοι τέταρες, οι νεότεροι Ιωνές τέσσερες, οι Λέσβοι τέσσερες και οι Βιωτοί πέταρες. Η ίδια λέξη λοιπόν, το αριθμητικό 4, δείτε πώς διαμορφωνόταν στις 5 αυτές διαφορετικές διαλέκτους. Όμως αυτή εδώ η πολυμορφία σιγά σιγά άρχισε να χάνεται την περίοδο της ελληνιστικής σκηνής, όπου είμαστε από το 323 περίπου π.Χ. με το 330 μετά Χριστόν. Εδώ την περίοδο αυτή έχουμε συγκλονιστικές αλλαγές. Δεν ξεχνάμε ότι η ελληνική διαδόθηκε, ομιλήθηκε σε πολύ μεγάλη εκτεταμένη περιοχή, στα μέχρι τα βάθη της Ασίας, στην Βόρεια Αφρική κτλ. Άρα λοιπόν από την διεπίδραση που υπήρξε με τις άλλες γλώσσες με τις οποίες συνυπήρξε η ελληνική, προκάλεσαν πραγματικά συγκλονιστικές αλλαγές. Εμείς οι γλωσσολόγοι λέμε ότι η ελληνιστική κοινή είναι ο κρίκος ανάμεσα στην αρχαία ελληνική και τη νέα ελληνική μορφή και την νέα ελληνική περίοδο της γλώσσας μας, γιατί ακριβώς εδώ συντελούνται σιγά σιγά οι αλλαγές που οδήγησαν στη νέα ελληνική. Έτσι λοιπόν, την περίοδο αυτή έχουμε και στη μορφολογία κάποιες αλλαγές. Για παράδειγμα, φεύγει ο πολύ γνωστός διοικός αριθμός. Τι ήταν ο διοικός αριθμός? Ήταν ένας τύπος που χρησιμοποιούνταν όταν είχαμε να δηλώσουμε μόνο 2 πράγματα, ας πούμε 2 χέρια, τα 2 μάτια κτλ. Επίσης, απλοποιούνται πολύ ανώμαλοι τύποι, λέξεις όπως ναυς, νιός, που ανήκε σε αυτή την πολύ δύσκολη τρίτη κλίση. Που τι ήταν η τρίτη κλίση? Ένα μεγάλο τσουβάλι που μέσα βάζαμε όλες τις εξαιρέσεις. Είχαμε λοιπόν, εξομαλύνονται και έτσι λοιπόν το ναυς νιός γίνεται πλοίο, η σιός γίνεται χείρος, το γουρούνι δηλαδή, και όλη η τρίτη κλίση ουσιαστικά εξομαλύνεται. Εξαφανίζεται η αττική κλίση, επίσης τα ανώμαλα ρήματα σε μη και γενικότερα τα ανώμαλα ρήματα εξομαλύνονται, η ευκτική σιγά σιγά περιορίζεται, ο παρατατικός αρχίζει και μοιάζει με τον παρατατικό που έχουμε στην ελληνική ήμιν αντί για ήν. Στη σύνταξη επίσης έχω την χρήση προθέσεων, εξασθενήσει η ειδωτική, η γενική αλλάζει, για να φτάσουμε σιγά σιγά στο νέο ελληνικό σύστημα που λέω ότι δεν έχουμε πια 4 πτώσεις, αλλά έχουμε περίπου 2,5, δηλαδή έχουμε την ονομαστική, η πτώση του υποκειμένου, την αιτιατική, η πτώση του αντικειμένου και έχουμε και μισή περίπου γενική. Λέω μισή γενική γιατί θα έλεγε κανείς των παιδακιών ή άλλες τέτοιες περιπτώσεις. Η γενική μας σιγά σιγά κλονίζεται. Στο λεξιλόγιο, την περίοδο της ελληνιστικής σκηνής, έχουμε και εδώ αλλαγές. Για παράδειγμα, κληρονομημένες λέξεις αλλάζουν σημασία. Επίσης, οι πρωτότυπες λέξεις αντικαθίστανται από άλλες παράγωγες. Για παράδειγμα, η λέξη οψάριον, που σήμαινε αυτό που το δίναμε ως πρώτο πιάτο, αν θέλετε, ο μεζές, κατέληξε να σημαίνει ψάρι. Επίσης, άλλες περιπτώσεις, το ους, οτίον, ους μου δίνει το οτίον, που σημαίνει το αυτή, είναι το υποκοριστικό η λέξη οτίον, ή επίσης η λέξη άλλος που μου δίνει το αλόνιον, και έτσι έχουμε το νέο ελληνικό αλόνι. Και έχουμε και πάρα πολλές περιπτώσεις με τα χρώματα. Είχαμε για παράδειγμα τον ερυθρό κόκο. Ήταν μια χρωστική την οποία χρησιμοποιούσαν οι άνθρωποι την περίοδο εκείνη για να βάψουν κόκκινο χρώμα. Αυτή η λέξη ερυθρός κόκκος μου έδωσε στη συνέχεια το κόκκινο χρώμα. Ή είχαμε τη λέξη κίτρον, το λεμόνι δηλαδή, που μου έδωσε τη λέξη κίτρινο. Ή είχαμε το χλωρόν πράσον, το φρέσκο πράσο, το οποίο μου έδωσε τη λέξη πράσινο. Βλέπουμε λοιπόν πώς συνδέονται τελικά ετυμολογικά τα χρώματα με τις ιδιότητες ειδών τα οποία έφεραν το χρώμα αυτό. Επίσης, την περίοδο αυτή έχω και την αλλαγή σημασίας λέξεων, ιδιαίτερα με την επίδραση του χριστιανισμού. Έχω για παράδειγμα τη λέξη άγγελος, που στην αρχαία ελληνική σημαίνει ο αγγελιοφόρος, ενώ τώρα αποκτά η λέξη άγγελος μια καινούργια σημασία αγγελιοφόρος του Θεού. Ή η λέξη εκκλησία, που παλαιότερα σήμαινε την μάζοξη, τη συγκέντρωση, ενώ τώρα είναι η συγκέντρωση μόνο πιστών. Ή λέξεις όπως ηγούμενος, μοναχός και άλλα τέτοια παραδείγματα που άλλαξαν σημασία με την επίδραση του χριστιανισμού. Επίσης, έχω και εμπλουτισμό μέσω του δανεισμού. Η ελληνική, την περίοδο της ελληνιστικής σκηνής, δανείζεται λέξεις από την περσική. Παράδειγμα, η λέξη παράδεισος, που ήταν το paradise, σήμαινε περιφραγμένος κήπος. Ή την λατινική, πάρα πολλές λέξεις μπαίνουν στο ελληνικό λεξιλόγιο, όπως το σπίτι, την περίοδο αυτή, αλλά επίσης και την εβραϊκή, πάρα πολύ συχνά. Άρα λοιπόν παρατηρούμε ότι στο λεξιλόγιο την περίοδο αυτή αρχίζει και διαμορφώνεται μία τάση, γενικότερα στη διαχρονική πορεία της ελληνικής, όπου έχουμε δύο παράλληλα ρεύματα. Το ένα είναι αυτό που λέμε τα διεθνή ελληνικά και το άλλο είναι τα νέα ελληνικά. Έτσι, και τα δύο αυτά ρεύματα τροφοδοτούν το ένα το άλλο. Το πρώτο ρεύμα αναφέρεται στον τεράστιο αριθμό φιλοσοφικών, επιστημονικών και άλλων όρων που υπάρχουν στις νεότερες γλώσσες και στηρίζονται σε αρχαία ελληνικά λεξιλογικά στοιχεία, ενώ το δεύτερο είναι μια ολοκληρωμένη γλώσσα που όμως περιορίζεται γεωγραφικά και αριθμητικά στην Ελλάδα, την Κύπρο και τις ελληνικές παροικίες του εξωτερικού. Τα δύο αυτά ρεύματα σήμερα συναντιούνται, καθώς οι εκατοντάδες χιλιάδες λέξεις των διεθνών ελληνικών, αναφέρθηκε σε αυτές και η πρέσβης μας και η κυρία Γιαννακίδου, έρχονται πια στα νέα ελληνικά. Τώρα, μια και μίλησα για αλλαγές που γίνονται στο λεξιλόγιο, οι αλλαγές, η σημασία μιας λέξης μπορεί να πλατείνει. Για παράδειγμα, έχω τη λέξη πόδι και έχω όμως και τη λέξη το πόδι του τραπεζιού, που είναι μια νέα σημασία. Άρα λοιπόν πλαταίνει η σημασία αυτή. Ή και συνήθως πλαταίνει μέσω της μεταφοράς. Έχω τη λέξη καρδιά, το μέρος του σώματος, έχω όμως και την καρδιά του μαρουλιού, που και εδώ έχω μια νέα νεωτερική σημασία. Μπορεί όμως η σημασία να στενέψει, όπως αυτό συνέβη με τη λέξη ποιητής, που στα αρχαία ελληνικά σήμαινε γενικά ο δημιουργός, ενώ σήμερα στα νέα ελληνικά χρησιμοποιούμε τη λέξη ποιητής για να αναφερθούμε μόνο σε αυτόν που παράγει ποίηση, ποιητικά κείμενα. Η σημασία μιας λέξης μπορεί επίσης να καλυτερεύσει. Παράδειγμα, η λέξη λεβέντης. Λεβέντες ήταν οι πειρατές οι οποίοι δρούσαν κυρίως στις ανατολικές θάλασσες και ακριβώς επειδή λένε αυτοί οι πειρατές ήταν μεγαλόψυχοι, μόνο λίστευαν και δεν σκότωναν τον κόσμο όπως οι υπόλοιποι πειρατές, για τον λόγο αυτό έχουμε την σημερινή σημασία του λεβέντης. Και μάλιστα η λέξη αυτή είναι μια λέξη που δεν μπορούμε να μεταφράσουμε σε άλλες γλώσσες. Βάζω ένα challenge στο κοινό που μας ακούει, να γράψει στο chat πώς θα μετάφραζε τη λέξη λεβέντης στα αγγλικά. Και ας μην μου πείτε brave, γιατί το brave είναι κάτι άλλο. Ποια είναι όλα εκείνα τα connotation της λέξης λεβέντης που μπορούμε να αποδώσουμε στην αγγλική. Ή η λέξη λέσχη, που σήμαινε παλαιότερα το άντρο των ληστών, ενώ σήμερα λέσχη είναι το μέρος που μπορεί να μαζευτούν άτομα συγκεκριμένα. Η σημασία όμως μιας λέξης μπορεί και να χειροτερέψει. Όπως για παράδειγμα οι λέξεις πονηρός, μοχθηρός και πανούργος. Οι λέξεις αυτές και οι τρεις σήμαιναν παλαιότερα ο δουλευταράς. Ο πονηρός είναι αυτός που κατέβαλε πόνο. Ο μοχθηρός, αυτός που κατέβαλε μόχθο, και ο πανούργος, ο πολυδουλευτής, αυτός που έκανε το πανέργον, όλα τα πράγματα. Σήμερα όμως, οι λέξεις αυτές έχουν αποκτήσει μια αρνητική σημασία. Θυμηθείτε λίγο ποιοι δούλευαν στην αρχαιότητα, δούλευαν μόνο οι δούλοι, άρα αυτά ήταν επίθετα τα οποία χαρακτήριζαν μόνο δούλους και για τον λόγο αυτό απέκτησαν αρνητική σημασία. Και τα έχουμε σήμερα σαν έτσι, αρνητικές λέξεις. Το ίδιο και η λέξη αγαθός, που στην αρχαία Ελλάδα σήμαινε ο ανδρείος, ενώ σήμερα ο αγαθός έχει μια αρνητική σημασία, αφέλεια κτλ. Καθώς τώρα διάφοροι θεσμοί της κοινωνικής ζωής του ανθρώπου, επίσης οι πρώτες επιστήμες, η φιλοσοφία, ξεκίνησαν από την αρχαία Ελλάδα, οι λέξεις που εκφράζουν αυτές τις ανθρώπινες δραστηριότητες, λοιπόν, που εκφράζουν αυτές τις ανθρώπινες δραστηριότητες, δημιουργήθηκαν στα ελληνικά και από εκεί, περνώντας συνήθως μέσα από το ενδιάμεσο των λατινικών, πλούτησαν την πνευματική ζωή του νεότερου κόσμου. Παράλληλα τώρα και η λατινική σκέψη, συνεχίζοντας την αρχική όθηση που δέχθηκε από τον ελληνόφωνο κόσμο, παρήγαγε και αυτή με τη σειρά της νέο πολιτισμικό υλικό και έτσι η αρχική πηγή δημιούργησε παράδοση έτσι ώστε σήμερα η επιστήμη να εξακολουθεί να αντλεί από τις δύο κλασικές γλώσσες, δηλαδή τα ελληνικά και τα λατινικά, όρους προκειμένου να ανταποκριθεί στις νέες ανάγκες της επιστήμης. Για να δούμε όμως τι γίνεται με τις αρχαίες λέξεις στα νέα ελληνικά. Υπάρχουν μια σειρά από λέξεις κληρονομημένες, που υπάρχουν δηλαδή συνεχώς στη λαϊκή γλώσσα και αυτές αποτελούν το βασικό λεξιλόγιο της νέας ελληνικής. Λέξεις όπως πατέρας, μητέρα, θάλασσα, έχω, τρώω, εγώ και ένα, δύο. Όλες αυτές λοιπόν είναι λέξεις κληρονομημένες, οι οποίες ανήκουν στο βασικό μας λεξιλόγιο. Συχνά βέβαια, οι λέξεις αυτές άλλαξαν σημαντικά στο πέρασμα των αιώνων, καθώς ακολούθησαν τους φωνολογικούς και μορφολογικούς κανόνες που επικράτησαν κατά την ιστορική εξέλιξη της γλώσσας. Έτσι λοιπόν, έχουμε τη λέξη φαΐ από το έναρθρο απαρέμφατο, το φαγίν, του συνοπτικού θέματος φαγ, του ρήματος τρώγω, τη λέξη λάδι από το αρχαίο έλεον. Εκτός όμως από αυτές τις λέξεις, έχω και ένα άλλο πολύ ενδιαφέρον φαινόμενο. Έχω την αναβίωση αρχαίων λέξεων. Μεγάλος λοιπόν αριθμός αρχαίων λέξεων έχουν επανεισαχθεί σαν λόγια δάνεια από τα αρχαία ελληνικά, κυρίως από τη γλώσσα της ελληνιστικής εποχής. Έχουμε λοιπόν αυτό το φαινόμενο που λέμε διαχρονικός δανεισμός. Λέξεις όπως ακριβολογία, επανέρχομαι, ισοψηφία, όροφος, φαγητός. Αρχαίες λέξεις λοιπόν που ήρθαν σαν δάνεια δεν προσαρμόστηκαν στη φωνολογία και τη μορφολογία της λαϊκής γλώσσας, με αποτέλεσμα να παραβιάζουν τους κανόνες της νέας ελληνικής. Έτσι λοιπόν, ενώ στα ελληνικά δεν έχουμε ακολουθίες όπως το χθου, το φθου, Συνήθως γίνονται χτού και φτού. Οι λόγοι σε αυτές τις λέξεις διασώζουν τέτοια συμπλέγματα και γι' αυτό λέμε ότι ανήκουν στο λόγιο λεξιλόγιο. Επίσης, έχω αρχαίες λέξεις και σε άλλες γλώσσες. Και βέβαια καταλαβαίνουμε ότι το μίσο που πρώτα διέπρευσαν οι αρχαίοι Έλληνες ήταν ο αθλητισμός, η ιατρική, η φιλοσοφία, τα μαθηματικά, πολιτική οργάνωση, ναυτιλία κτλ. Τα πεδία αυτά λοιπόν γέννησαν λεξιλόγιο, το οποίο διαδόθηκε στις γλώσσες όλου του κόσμου. Για παράδειγμα, η λέξη αθλητής, η λέξη υπόδρομος, η λέξη επιληψία, φιλοσοφία, μουσική, ιστορία, στρατηγία, αριθμητική, είναι λέξεις που μπορούμε να βρούμε σχεδόν σε όλες τις γλώσσες, τουλάχιστον της Ευρώπης, τις περισσότερες. Άλλες τώρα αρχαίες ελληνικές λέξεις μπήκαν και συνεχίζουν να μπαίνουν κατευθείαν στις νεότερες γλώσσες, χωρίς να έχουμε την διαμεσολάβηση των λατινικών, όπως για παράδειγμα οι αγγλικές λέξεις ερωτικός, erotic, aristocracy, democracy, politics κτλ., οι οποίες πέρασαν κατευθείαν σε ευρωπαϊκές γλώσσες χωρίς το ενδιάμεσο των λατινικών. Κατά την ελληνιστική εποχή, με την παραπέρα ανάπτυξη των επιστημών αλλά και θεολογικών αναζητήσεων, νέες λέξεις δημιουργήθηκαν, άλλων λέξεων άλλαξε η σημασία και πέρασαν και αυτές σαν κληρονομιά στον υπόλοιπο κόσμο. Λέξεις όπως γεωγραφία, αστρολογία. Αστρολογία στα αρχαία ελληνικά σήμαινε ότι και η λέξη αστρονομία, έτσι, δεν έχει σχέση με τα ζώδια, όπως σημαίνει σήμερα. Και επίσης και η αρχαία λέξη θεολογία απέκτησε εντελώς ιδιαίτερη σημασία και πέρασε στα λατινικά σαν θεολογία. Όπως συνέβη με τις αρχαίες, έτσι και πολλές ελληνιστικές λέξεις υιοθετήθηκαν και αυτές απευθείας από τις νεότερες γλώσσες, χωρίς το ενδιάμεσο των λατινικών, λέξεις όπως βιογραφία, biography, η λέξη έντομο, insect, που σημαίνει ακριβώς αυτό. Βλέπετε, αναγνωρίζετε στη λέξη έντομο την λέξη το μη, έτσι. Επίσης, μερικών λέξεων η ελληνική καταγωγή δεν φαίνεται με την πρώτη ματιά. Η λέξη παραβολή, που στα αρχαία σήμαινε σύγκριση ή απεικόνηση, έγινε κατά την ελληνιστική εποχή το λατινικό παράμπολα, ιδιαίτερα στη χρήση για τις παραβολές του Χριστού, τον κατεξοχήν δηλαδή λόγω της εποχής, από όπου σήμερα έχουμε τη γαλλική λέξη παρόλα, το ιταλικό παρόλα, το ισπανικό παλάβρα και ούτω καθεξής. Ή η λέξη σχολή, που στα αρχαία σήμαινε άνεση, ανάπαυση, καμία σχέση με τη σημερινή έννοια σχολείο, έτσι. Δίνει το λατινικό σκόλα, από όπου προέρχονται ανάμεσα στα άλλα το γαλλικό école, το αγγλικό school, το γερμανικό schule, η λέξη άγγελος, στα αρχαία ελληνικά σήμαινε αγγελιοφόρος, γίνεται στα λατινικά άγγελους, από όπου το γαλλικό ange, το γερμανικό angel, το αγγλικό angel και ούτω καθεξής. Η λέξη κημητήριο, που έγινε το γαλλικό cimetière, cemetery, το ιταλικό cimitero και ούτω καθεξής. Ένα πολύ ωραίο παράδειγμα, η λέξη άστρον σε συνδυασμό με το λατινικό πρόθυμα dis, που δηλώνει στέρηση, αντίθεση, έδωσαν στο μεσαίωνα το ιταλικό disastro, από όπου το γαλλικό désastre και ύστερα το αγγλικό disaster, δηλαδή συμφορά, καταστροφή. Στη λέξη καταστροφή βλέπετε και το άστρο, έτσι. Η αρχική αντίληψη αναφερόταν σε κάποιον που ήταν γεννημένος υπό την κακή επίδραση ενός άστρου. Τέτοιες λέξεις διαδόθηκαν από την λαϊκή και όχι από την λόγια παράδοση, ενσωματώθηκαν από την αρχή στις νέες λαϊκές γλώσσες που αναπτύχθηκαν τον Μεσαίωνα και γι' αυτό και παρουσιάζουν περισσότερες αλλαγές. Τώρα, να μιλήσουμε για κάποιες αρχαίες λέξεις, το αναφέραμε το άγγελος, που ουσιαστικά η σημασία που έχει φτάσει στα ελληνικά σήμερα δεν είναι η αρχαία ελληνική, αλλά έχει γίνει μέσω της διαμεσολάβησης της σημασίας μελέκ, και αυτή τη σημασία έχουμε αποδώσει πια σήμερα στην λέξη άγγελος. Ωραίο επίθετο επίσης, το επίθετο Χριστός, μαρτυρείται στο ουδέτερο γένος. Κάτι λοιπόν που μπορεί να αληφθεί όπως γιατρικό ή μύρο, χρησιμοποιήθηκε κατά την ελληνιστική εποχή σαν μετάφραση του αραμαϊκού Μεσσίας. και έδωσε τη λέξη Χριστός. Ο Χριστός ποιος είναι? Είναι ο μυρωμένος, όπως οι βασιλιάδες των Ιουδαίων. Αυτό πέρασε στα λατινικά σαν απευθείας δάνειο, Κρίστους. Στη συνέχεια, σε συνδυασμό με το άνους, έδωσε τη λέξη Χριστιάνους ή Χριστιανοί και στη συνέχεια μας έδωσε το ρήμα χριστιανίζω. Πραγματικά αυτό το ταξίδι των λέξεων είναι πάρα πολύ μαγικό. Στο νέο λεξιλόγιο η ελληνική έχει δώσει πια πολλούς, όχι μόνο όρους, αλλά όπως είπα και στο χαιρετισμό μου και συστατικά για να φτιάξουμε όρους. Όλα αυτά τα μικρότερα τεμάχια που βλέπετε στην διαφάνεια αυτή και να κλείσω την παρουσίαση αυτή με μια πολύ ενδιαφέρουσα κατηγορία λέξεων, τα αντιδάνεια. Τι είναι τα αντιδάνεια? Είναι λέξεις που ξεκίνησαν από την ελληνική, πέρασαν σε μια άλλη γλώσσα και ξαναγύρισαν πίσω στην ελληνική κάπως αλλαγμένα, όπως η λέξη ταρταρούγα, που είναι ένα αντικείμενο κατασκευασμένο από όστρακο χελώνας, προέρχεται από το ιταλικό ταρταρούγα, που στηρίζεται στο ιστερολατινικό ταρταρούχους και αυτό είναι βέβαια απόδοση του ελληνιστικού ταρταρούχος, που ήταν ο δαίμονας του Τάρταρου και η χρήση αυτής της λέξης οφείλεται στο γεγονός ότι το μεσαίωνα η χελώνα θεωρούταν σύμβολο του κακού πνεύματος. Ένα άλλο ωραίο παράδειγμα είναι η λέξη φουντούκι, που προέρχεται από το ποντικό κάριο, το καρύδι δηλαδή που φύτρωνε στον πόντο, στον έξινο πόντο, έγινε φιντίκ στην τουρκική και γύρισε στα ελληνικά ως φουντούκι. Αυτό εδώ λοιπόν είναι ένα αντιδάνειο. Νομίζω ότι μπορώ να σταματήσω εδώ για να σεβαστώ ακριβώς τον χρόνο που έχουμε στο πρόγραμμα. Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ που με παρακολουθήσατε.
Great. Thank you so much, Professor Gabrielido, for this wonderful presentation. Our next presentation will be by Professor Dionysis Goutsas, who is a professor of text linguistics at the National Nicopolitan University of Athens. He has also taught at the University of Birmingham and the University of Cyprus. He has written several articles on text linguistics and discourse analysis, translation studies, and corpus linguistics. He has published several books in English and Greek, and he has edited volumes in Greek, English, and French. He has been research coordinator of the projects developing the corpus of Greek texts and the diachronic corpus of Greek of the 20th century, as well as specialized corpora of spoken everyday conversations and the discourse of aphasic speakers. Professor Goutsas will be giving us a lecture titled Contemporary Greek from the beginning of the 20th century to the digital age. Professor Goutsas.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ, Χριστίνα. Thanks very much. And may I thank the organizers for this wonderful occasion to celebrate International Greek Language Day. I'm really honored, and it's a pleasure for me to participate in this occasion. Let me find my presentation, which I want to share. That was a fascinating talk by Zoe Gabrielido. I'd like to take up on her talk and focus on the last part of this multi-century journey of Greek through the ages, and especially in the 20th century. I don't seem able to find the presentation, though. Let me see.
Ξέρεις, αν θέλεις, φύγει από το screen, άνοιξε το αρχείο σου για να στο... Μπράβο.
Okay, good. Okay, this should work now. Thanks very much. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the Greek language in the 20th century. And since I come from the University of Athens, I would like to start with this picture from a picture of the University of Athens at the beginning of the 10th century, which shows, as you can see, riots taking place. These are riots between the students of the University of Athens and the Mount Police of the era. And
sorry to interrupt, but we can't see your slides changing. I would suggest that you
right. I do it like you. Okay.
Yeah. That's why I
Let me
did
go back. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
Right. So is this okay now?
Yes.
Wonderful. So this is the riots taking place at the University of Athens, in front of the University of Athens, at the very beginning of the 20th century. It's 1901, and the students of the University of Athens have really taken the arms and protesting against what? Against this translation, basically, this translation of the Gospel of, according to Matthew, that was made by Alexander Spalis, and it was actually an attempt to turn the Hellenistic Greek of the Gospels into modern Greek, and it's a really surprising event to see students going down to the streets and protesting about the translation, about a language issue. And perhaps we can understand the difference between the original Greek, which you can see here, and so on and so forth, and the translation, which you can see above. This is Alexander Spalis' translation. So you can find words like Pascha there in the translation instead of Pascha. It's this slight difference that Zoe mentioned before from the phonology of ancient Greek to the phonology of modern Greek for Easter, and then words like protopapades in the translation instead of archieres or chief priests, which is a totally different word. I mean, it's composed with different constituents there. But what's important is that at the beginning of the 20th century, you find things like medical descriptions, which are made in totally different forms of the language. And on the one hand, we have diagrams like this one. This is a diagram of the stomach with some terminology below. It's a translation from an English anatomy, and it mentions the word isophagos or katapionas, and at the same time, in the, let's say, in a newspaper describing medical theme, you'd find a totally different vocabulary, total different phonology, morphology. So you'll have this in parallel at the same time. And what's even more interesting is that modern descriptions of the stomach, or medical descriptions, or any kind of scientific treatise in Greek has taken the option that is not preferred by the modern Greek version. So it chooses isophagos rather than katapionas, which is the difference between esophagus and gullet. And we go for leptoentero rather than mikrantero. So it's small intestine rather than bowel. So it's really weird to think that at the very beginning of the 10th century, you'd have both options, and now you ended up with the more ancient-like one, if you like. And of course, it all goes down to what we linguists call the language question. It's the split between the demotic form of the language and katharevousa, the pure language, the attempt to purify, let's say, Greek from all elements which are foreign to it or are not really appropriate for this wonderful Greek language. And I've put down the very formal definition of diglossia, this situation of a split between a superposed variety and a lower variety spoken by the same speech community, to indicate that this is a situation that, at least according to Ferguson, the first linguist who extensively wrote about this, can also be found between standard Swiss German, standard Arabic and vernaculars, the standard French and the Creole in Haiti, and of course, Katharevou's the Demotic is one of the prominent examples. Why did we have a language question in the Greek 20th century? Well, before the independence at the beginning of the 19th century, there is no standard, but there is some common understanding. There is a common norm, let's say. At the end of the 19th century, however, there is this desire to have a standard language, and there you have several options. You have the option to go back to ancient Greek, the option to follow the language as it has evolved through the centuries and go for Demotic Greek, and the option of in between, going for some kind of purification, which is what Katharevou's was. Of course, at the end of this 20th century, Demotic was the language that became the official language of Greece. Again, we should think of this question in terms of the longer-term history of Greek, where you have multiple going back and going through the ages, going back to the Attic Ionic. As we have really explained, in the ancient Greek period, we do not have a common language. We only have dialects. And then at the era of Alexander the Great, we have Hellenistic Koine, the common Greek of the era. But you have the first attempt to go back to Attic or Ionic Greek. It's the movement of Atticism, this desire to go back to an ideal language that is the language of the wonderful, speakers of Attic Greek at the past. And again, in the long 1,000-year period of Byzantine Greek, you have the same attempt to go back with the high style. So people would go back to Attic Greek and try and write as people would do, let's say, 2,000 years before them. And the third movement of Atticism is the one you find in Standard Modern Greek, in the process of forming Standard Modern Greek, and this is the movement of Katharevou's, really. But to make things a little bit more complicated, all these things take place in a very troubled 20th century. A century where the first half was spent in an effort to unify the different areas of Greek. As you can see, all these things that we now believe are a part of modern Greece were not given to us, from the beginning of the century or the creation of the Greek independent state. And we had to reach the middle of the 20th century to have, let's say, the Dodecanese incorporated into modern Greece. And there you have a complex interaction between events happening at the historical background and developments in language, in official language, and the language of education. So the 20th century starts with the gospel riots, and the riots are around the translation of Oresteia, Aeschylus' Oresteia. And then you have, in the first decade, you have Katharevou's in the Greek constitution as the official language of Greek, but this changes in 1917. We go back to the Demotic, back to Katharevou's, up to 76, basically, where Demotic becomes the official state language. We don't have the time to go into all these correspondences between events like political developments and what happens in education and official language policy, but it's a very complex situation which makes the language question a question of politics as well. At the same time, what people recognized as diglossia is not necessarily what happened in real life. So there's still a question of what actual people did in specific contexts. And this is what we should be turning to now in order to find out what did people speak during the 20th century in Greece and other areas. And for this purpose, we can consult Greek corpora, which means large collections of texts that have been compiled for the purpose of linguistic analysis. And we do have two corpora available for this purpose: the diachronic corpus of Greek of the 20th century, which we created at the University of Athens, and it spans 9 decades from the 1900s to 1999, and then larger corpus, the corpus of Greek texts, that picks up the story from the 1990 and reaches up to 2010 and has a bit more words, like 30 million words. For the first corpus, the Greek corpus of the 20th century, we've collected several kinds of texts, like public speeches, film scripts, dialogue from films, novels, short stories, and so forth from literary genres, academic texts, law and administration, and private texts, like letters. So from this collection, I'm going to present some fairly recent research on what we found about what Greeks did in terms of diglossia in the 20th century. And this is the first view of what people actually did. In this diagram, you can see the two options, the ya, the demotic, versus the dia in Katharevousa. For is the preposition for. And this is, again, a rather complicated picture. At the beginning of the century, it's the Katharevousa element, which is much more frequent, but then it drops fairly drastically in the first decades, and then, especially towards the end of the 20th century, the demotic ya takes over its role. So you have a reversal of the situation, but that happens fairly early in the 20th century. And this is the picture of two other elements, the same preposition, in or at, se versus is. Again, well, the picture is a bit more complicated here. We start from the demotic se being more frequent at the beginning of the 20th century. And after further turbulences, we end up with the same situation, with se being prominent in the 1970s and onwards. And to complicate things a little bit more, we can see the feminine, the genitive of feminine nouns in is versus eos, this polis versus poleos of the city, where changes only happen towards the end of the 20th century. So you have the Katharevousa element, which is more prominent throughout the 20th century, and then there's a sharp rise of the demotic version and a sharp decline of the Katharevousa variant. This is a very general picture of what happens in the 20th century, but we now have to go into some more specific text types to understand what people actually did in specific contexts. And this is the picture for public speeches, let's say. Dark and light blue are for the Katharevousa version, and red and pink are for the demotic versions. So public speeches, everything is in Katharevousa until the 1960s, and then you have a sheer drop. And the rise of the demotic elements happens in the 50s and 60s, whereas the general picture remains with the feminine genitive. Academic texts, the same picture, more or less. Literature, it's the opposite, the reverse picture, where se is much more prominent. The same comes with ya, whereas the ya and is not frequent at all. And well, the genitive anyway is not very frequent in literary texts. And this is the picture of film dialogues. You can see straight lines there. The choice has been made even from the beginning of the 20th century. And the choice is for the demotic elements. The Katharevous elements are practically non-existent. Let's leave this picture for now, this diagram, and go for letters, which is perhaps the most interesting text type in the corpus. Well, there you can see a much more gradual change. So is, for example, the Katharevous element goes gradually into decline, goes up and down, and then almost disappears. And then se goes smoothly up, and the same goes for a ya. Again, the genitive is not very significant in this term. So what's the conclusion from this? The conclusion, first of all, is that what actual people did in specific context depends on the genre or text type. And I've put these text types here in a sort of a line, a continuum. On the one hand, we have law and administration and academic texts. We go through public speeches and newsreels, private letters starting towards the end of the demotic, and film dialogues and literature, of course, from the beginning towards the demotic. So it's a distinction between public and personal text types, or more formal, planned, and conventional text types. For the former, the ones in which are public and formal, these are very conservative text types, but there you have sudden changes towards the end of the 20th century. At the other end, in the demotic end, film dialogues and literature are innovative, so they go for the demotic from the beginning of the 20th century and only have minimal changes. And there, in the middle, with private letters, you have the normal, gradual language change, the one that every linguist would expect from any language. Second conclusion, this actually means that Katharevous and demotic were not real varieties, were not real discrete varieties that you could, put your hand on and separate, but are rather descriptive idealizations. They are what people had in their minds when they were talking about these things, or they were trying to choose one or the other. And we have two further pieces of evidence for this thing. The first one is the parallel use of Katharevous and demotic in the same text. So in texts like this, you have many choices from the Katharevous, is again, and then at the very last sentence, sta, prosopaton, and so on and so forth. So it's a question here, why do you have both elements in the same text? And this is a matter of a long discussion. But then again, you have the other thing that Zoe also mentioned in her talk, the fact that you have learned items surviving in the use. So if you take a look at the corpus of Greek texts, which I remind you are texts from the 1990s to 2010, you do have Katharevous, let's say, endings, or more formal or learned endings, whichever way you want to call them. You have these things in name entities, melitis enosis philon acropoleos, on the other hand, so you have both one and the other ending, or street names, which is fairly normal in modern Greek, Andrianopoulos, street. You have the same thing in church language, Patriarchis Konstantinopoulos rather than Konstantinopoulis. you have some remnants in the language of the law, διατάξεως, αποφάσεως, ενστάσεως, and so on and so forth. And of course, we have many fixed phrases in έως, εξ αποστάσεως, μέχρι τελικής πτώσεως, εκ πρώτης όψεως, πάσης φύσεως, so on and so forth, which follow the learned form. So, what do we get out of this? What's the situation that we can gather about the orientation of the language in the 21st century? What are the new elements that say that Greek has gone into the digital age? First of all, we have new genres. New genres, this is a typical extract from, Facebook Messenger, where you have a multimodal text, pictures, words in English, words in Greek, and so on and so forth. And the same happens with an extract from Twitter. And here you can see, yes, the title is in English, and then even the question mark is an English question mark rather than the Greek, semicolon. But it's fairly conversant in Greek, in modern Greek. I mean, it's everything in modern Greek here, apart from the frame and some very specific elements, like the names or the elements about, minutes and so on and so forth. Second point that we go into the digital age is that now we have the ability to analyze language in new ways. And of course, corpora, the large collection of texts, which we can go to have sort of, let's say, revolutionize the way we look at Greek. And of course, the fact that you can go to the Greek Corpus 20 and you can find any word you like, and then take out of it sort of an indication when these words were used and which decade was more prominent, so on and so forth. Unfortunately, at the moment, we're in the process of changing the interface, so you won't be able to visit the word pages, but I believe from next week, you'll be able to go to the web page of Greek Corpus 20 and the corpus of Greek texts and consult them if you haven't done so far. And we have new ways of looking at the Greek language. What you have here is a word list from a Greek poet. I will leave you to guess which one it is. And of course, you can check, from words like εμορφιά or βασιλεύς or mes, hili, psyche, and so forth. Idoni. Well, you can guess that it's Konstantinos Kavafis. But I mean, what we see here is a different way of approaching the poetry of Kavafi through linguistic analysis and through new ways of visualizing language. And finally, another indication of what we can do with new ways of analyzing language, we can look at new words, neologisms, that have entered the Greek language in the process that Zoe described in her talk. And here you can see from the corpus of Greek texts, like that basically that διαδικτυό, the Greek word for internet, is really frequent or as frequent as internet with a Latin element. And that also happens with the words derived from internet and διαδικτυό. And if you look at text types, you'll see that the whole story happens in non-fiction and ημερωτικά. These text types was very prominent with bringing in new words. So, to sum up, we are in the digital age. Are we working towards a new standard for the Greek language? And are there to be any new language conflicts after the glossia? Well, all these new genres of the digital age and new practices, let's say, and neologisms are really very prominent in the sense that they indicate some rapid language changes, some changes that take place that we cannot really follow as linguists or perhaps as speakers as well. I mean, new words coming our way all the time. At the same time, the influence of media and education have the well-known in linguistics effect of leveling differences. So let's say we sort of we're losing on the diversity of dialects and perhaps different varieties of Greek. So it is my impression that Greek is now seeking a new balance between global phenomena, like the use of social media, as I hinted at above, and developing some local language of dealing with these things. And of course, language planning on the one hand, and natural, typical language changes happens at the moment. I believe that the new ways we have of analyzing language are not only going to give us a better description of Greek, but are going to give us some new insights into how we use Greek now. And I think this is what this workshop aims at doing. And I believe it will do it in the best possible way. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you so much, Professor Goutas. So we can have about 10 minutes for questions. So if anyone has any questions, you can use the virtual hand at Zoom, or you can write your question in the chat, and we will try to get through as many of them as possible. So does anyone have any questions?
I think there was a question earlier. So there was one by Mrs. Georgakis, Christina Georgakis from Chicago, that said, what incentives can be used to entice young Greek people of the diaspora to learn Greek? How do we preserve the Greek language for Greeks of the diaspora? This is a good question.
Okay, wonderful. So we can start on that. Professor Gavrilidou already responded via the chat room, and she suggested that the two better ways to do this is community support and more attractive teaching methods. Professor Gavrilidou, would you like to elaborate on that, or is there anyone else who would like to contribute to the discussion?
No, I think that's the main idea, to provide attractive courses and teaching. This would enhance students' let's say, desire to follow, to attend these classes. And maybe also we should help the support of the community, do things with the community and help the children practice their Greek, doing things with the community, attending, I don't know, ceremonies or whatever. So I think that's all. And I would like to say that the curricula that we created, Δημοκριτείου University created for teaching Greek as a heritage language, will help a lot of teachers to offer this kind of modern teaching.
Right.
Yeah. At the same time, if I may add, I mean, all these new digital tools that we have in our disposal will make things a little bit more easier, if you like, or a bit more attractive at the same time. So if people from the other end of the world can see us now and, you know, communicate with us, why don't we take this opportunity to do this with language teaching as well?
Thank you very much. I wanted to thank both of our speakers for very exciting presentations. Σας ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ και τους δύο, εξαιρετικά. Έτσι, μάθαμε, we learned a lot of things and, you know, very, very useful things. One thing that I wanted to add to this conversation about the attractiveness of Greek is also one of the things that I think needs to play into the communities is also to teach them that, you know, this is the language of their ancestors. It's a very important language. It's a language that the children should, in some sense, be happy to learn because it is a language of their own. And I think that this is something that the diaspora, at least here in the United States, has to a certain extent failed to inculcate to the younger generation, that this is an important language to learn. It's because it is the language of their heritage. I mean, a lot of Greek children learn other languages. They learn Spanish and they learn French or German. But, you know, when you think of the materials that are given in Spanish, do you think that they are considerably more like attractive, or is there anything that we can learn from those methodologies of the more, you know, popular languages? Popular in the sense of bigger languages being spoken by bigger people, and therefore there are more materials. Is there anything that we can learn in terms of the technology or the methods?
If I may, in that case, it's not an issue of material. It's the fact that speaking Spanish, you have more possibilities to work, to find a good job. So it's the professional development and things like that. So children have the incentive, the motive, actually, to learn Spanish because they will gain something. That's what we have to do with Greek. Αν μπορώ να μιλήσω ελληνικά, γιατί έχουμε μαζί μας και τις κοπέλες από την Ουκρανία. Είχαμε συζητήσει το ζήτημα αυτό την προηγούμενη φορά και μου λέγανε ότι κλείνουν τα τμήματα ελληνικών σπουδών γιατί τα παιδιά καταλαβαίνουν ότι δεν μπορούν να κάνουν κάτι μετά με τις σπουδές που κάνουν στην ελληνική γλώσσα. Άρα λοιπόν εκεί πρέπει να δείξουμε πώς μπορούν να αξιοποιήσουν την ελληνική στη συνέχεια, όχι μόνο για επαγγελματική ανάπτυξη, αλλά και για άλλους λόγους.
Ναι, το καταλαβαίνουμε. Αυτό είναι το ωφελημιστικό επιχείρημα, ότι πρέπει να τους δείξουμε ότι υπάρχει κάποιο αποτέλεσμα, κάτι μπορούν να κάνουν. Το καταλαβαίνουμε. Και επίσης, it's very important to realize that unlike with Spanish, so in the Spanish communities, στα ισπανικά, we have, you know, the language being spoken in the family, in the community. There is a widespread presence of the language at the community level, which we lack here in the United States. So the Greek is not being spoken widely spread in the community, not even within the family or very little within the family. So these are things that we need to realistically take into consideration when we model an approach that can be efficient. But at the same time, I think we need to cultivate this idea that it's not just about, you know, what they can do. And I think in trying to make the argument that here with Greek, you can do all these great things, I think this is a harder argument to make. And, you know, because you just can't do that many things with Greek. But learning Greek has a value in itself. I think that, you know, regardless of whether you're going to do things professionally, it has a value because it will allow you to read all these wonderful works of literature. It will allow that have been written in this language. It will be useful because it will allow you to connect to the living traditions and culture of modern Greece. And it is also a language that will allow you to go to church and understand what is happening during service. So these are also good arguments that one has to inculcate to the children and to the community, along with the more heuristic argument about, you know, why it is useful to learn Greek. I think we need to be able to, you know, to encourage both.
And of course, as a part of the identity of...
Right, it's a very important element of the identity. And I think, again, the US-based diaspora, I don't know about Australia, is very different from the European-based diaspora in that it grew in isolation to a certain extent and removed from the body of Greece, and a lot of the first and second and third wave migrants weren't able to go back to Greece to be able to foster, you know, more lively relations. And as a result of that, the language did get lost. So to a certain extent, what we need to do is language revitalization. Along the lines of what is being done for very small languages like Native American languages, for example. I mean, they follow different paths, or Hebrew, like a very similar discussion arose with Hebrew. Like Hebrew was a language that was not spoken for hundreds of years, but then revitalization process and a particular national narrative allowed it to flourish and become now the living language of Israel. So I think we need to keep these things in mind as we inculcate in the minds of the younger generation, you know, the ambition to learn Greek, and also to the older ones in the community, a kind of reassessment that learning Greek is as important to being Greek than going to the Greek Orthodox Church. I think, you know, for many in the US diaspora, just going to church satisfies the Greekness requirement. But we need to be able to say that, no, it doesn't. You know, just by going to the Greek Orthodox Church, the Russians do, and the Bulgarians do, and the Serbs do. But, you know, we still have our national languages, which are very, very important, and it's what makes us distinctive.
Έχω μια μικρή ερώτηση για τον Διονύση, αν θα μπορούσα να κάνω, και μετά να περάσουμε στα εργαστήρια. Διονύση, είπες ότι η γενική αρχίζει, η χρήση της γενικής σε «εις» και όχι πόλεως, αρχίζει και το breaking point είναι τη δεκαετία του 80, έτσι, αρχές του 80. Νομίζεις ότι αυτό συνδέεται και με την αλλαγή στο πολιτικό σκηνικό της χώρας, δηλαδή έχει κάποια τέτοια σχέση?
Απολύτως. Νομίζω ότι είναι πάρα πολύ σχετικό και είναι ενδιαφέρον που βλέπουμε αυτές τις δύο μεγάλες αλλαγές στην αρχή του 20ου αιώνα και στο τέλος του 20ου αιώνα, που πηγαίνουν μαζί με πολιτικά γεγονότα. Στην αρχή έχουμε την κυβέρνηση Βενιζέλου που προβληματίζεται για τα πράγματα και στο τέλος βέβαια έχουμε οπωσδήποτε με τη σοσιαλιστική κυβέρνηση που ουσιαστικά χτίζει πάνω στη δεκαετία του 70. Το βλέπω δηλαδή λίγο πιο σταδιακά. Οι αλλαγές έχουν αρχίσει από το 60, ακόμα και μέσα στη Χούντα, οπωσδήποτε από το 70, και το 80 επικυρώνονται.
Επικυρώνονται είναι η λέξη, μπράβο, ακριβώς.
Επικυρώνονται νομίζω. Δηλαδή, εκεί είναι η αποφασιστική στιγμή που λέει ότι ναι, μπορούμε τώρα να περάσουμε σε μια νέα μορφή γλώσσας, χωρίς τα διλήμματα, ας πούμε, του παρελθόντος. Κάτι τέτοιο. Είναι πολύ ενδιαφέρον.
Ευχαριστούμε πολύ. Χριστίνα.
Yeah. So now we have two experimental workshops that will be taking place at the same time. If you wish to attend the workshop Strategies of Learning and Teaching Greek as a Heritage Language with Lydia Mitic as facilitator, Lydia is a specialized training staff in the Democrιτeu University of Thrace. You shall remain in this link. If you wish to attend the workshop Designing Teaching Units for the Teaching of Greek as a Heritage Language, then there is a different link in the chat. The second workshop, for which the link is in the chat, will be taking place in Greek. Να το πω και στα ελληνικά, άμα θέλετε να παρακολουθήσετε το πρώτο εργαστήριο με την κυρία Μίτιτς, παραμένετε εδώ. Αλλιώς, άμα θέλετε να παρακολουθήσετε το δεύτερο εργαστήριο με την κυρία Μητσιάκη, υπάρχει το οποίο θα είναι στα ελληνικά, υπάρχει το link στο chat, μπορείτε να πάτε σε αυτό το link. So we'll just give a bit of time to people to go to whatever workshop they wish to go.